welcome back to Beau My God. I'm your host, Beau Bradley. My pronouns are he and they. This week, we're here in a very special first ever video podcast episode to talk with Tony Zosherafatain, who is the director and filmmaker behind Trans and Trumpland. Today, Tony's going to sit down with us and we're going to talk through the documentary. We're going to talk about how he felt going from state to state, traveling through the U.S. to share the stories of trans people in the era of President Donald Trump. So, here we go. Wanted to know if you would mind speaking a little bit about TransWave Films and about kind of how that came about and the idea behind that, because I know you've spoken to it before about how important it is for trans and gender nonconforming people to tell our own stories and tell each other's stories. But
yeah.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. Oh, anyways, TransWave Films, it's a good start off to the convo because it relates to Trans and Trumpland and trans creatives. So it started in 2019 before I wanted to create Trans and Trumpland. And with my business partner, we discussed essentially what we wanted to do as trans people to protect trans stories. And so to have trans people in key leadership behind the camera and also in front of the camera, whether as subjects of a documentary or as actors, etc. And so we realized that there was a scarcity in the film industry and even in arts in general, with trans people having their own companies. And so there was an opportunity there to kind of seize the moment and seize this moment in history and say, okay, well, let's do one of the first trans-led film production companies and roll with that. And I think it's a good way to kind of organize films and also sort of to make sure that we made sure that the crew we hired was diverse and trans led. So I would say it was definitely due to the lack of representation in Hollywood as the cause, and then it became clear that we could kind of use this company as a way to advocate for more trans people being leaders with filmmaking, because a lot of cis people still to this day act as trans people in films and TV shows, or cis people will direct trans films.
Yeah.
And I think that is wrong.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's where that comes from.
That's awesome. I think the first thing that I saw connected to TransWave Films was Venture Out, the documentary.
Yeah.
That was yeah. I think it's really cool. It's one of the first things I saw when I was starting to question my gender. So personally, thank you. I think that's really important and really cool.
Yeah. That's Perry's org. That's cool. Perry Cohen, and very nice person. Yeah, cool. Yeah. REI was great.
So just to give kind of a little background, for Trans and Trumpland, you went across the US. You went to North Carolina, Texas, Mississippi, and Idaho to share the stories of other transgender individuals and what their life has been like, resulting kind of from the election of Donald Trump and all that fell after that, including increase in anti-trans rhetoric and violence and some pretty ridiculous legislation. And how did you pick what stories to do and where to go? And at the same time, I know, like, personally, there's even before I came out as being genderqueer, even just as a queer individual relating to sexuality, like traveling different places in the country doesn't always feel great or feel safe. And I'm just interested how that played a role in your decisions.
Yeah, definitely. And ditto to like not feeling safe around the country, because that was a feeling that I and my crew, just together, those of us that were trans and queer, definitely felt unsafe in these spaces. And that's mostly because of the anti-trans laws that exist. And so kind of when I was deciding on which states to go to, and to answer your question, is like, I thought that there was, I think that like in the media, including journalism and film, there isn't a lot that's known about being trans in like the Midwest and the South, for example, but there's a lot known about like being trans in New York, like Pose or LA. And I realized like, okay, well, there is right now the perfect political moment when Trump is just so explicitly anti-trans and so explicitly anti anyone who's not a white cis man. I thought that, okay, well, I can't sit back as a filmmaker and just continue to watch this unfold. And this was back in 2016 when he won, when I got the idea. And I was like, I can't do nothing as a filmmaker and activist and just sit back while I, as a privileged New Yorker, see my trans siblings suffering so much in these states. So that I think Trump was like the impetus for trans in Trumpland, but then kind of selecting the states was another kind of impetus, and realizing like what subjects have not had their time as trans people in the media, and where do they live? Do they live in the worst states ever during the Trump era? So we realized, well, yeah, we need to go to red states, instead of like New York and California, for example, because while this was happening during the Trump era with his rhetoric, these states where it's unsafe to be trans, it was even worse for them, and so, yeah, so that was kind of like the political, ethical decisions that went into where we selected the states, like the reasons why we created Trans in Trumpland. And I guess for me too, like, I really honed in on 4 states with really bad political headlines about trans people, really bad policies. And then I was like, who do I want in those states? And including white and trans people of color. Like, I wanted to make sure that I didn't just have it through a white trans lens, and even just like different people of class backgrounds and immigration status. So
I saw an interview the other day on YouTube where you called it a historical time capsule or a historical capsule, and I thought that was like, that just blew my mind. But that's so accurate, and it'll
yeah,
be helpful to look back on.
exactly. Because when we were like editing, we were up against the clock, because like we finished in 2019. But what I mean by up against the clock was we weren't sure if we were going to release before the election, and we had hoped to, because that would have been even greater.
Yeah.
But then we didn't meet that deadline for releasing, and so we were like, okay, well, cool, that Biden won, great, but how can we navigate releasing this in a post-Trump time? But I think, again, it's a time capsule, because it's similar to like the pandemic. When we get over this stuff in a couple of years, we're gonna want to analyze what the hell happened over the past few years, and I think people can watch it and understand what happened to trans people now.
For sure. You also mentioned in the first episode that Trump was elected right after you finished your physical transition, moving into a personal question. If you wouldn't mind sharing, did his candidacy have any effect on the timing of your transition or the impact of your urgency to get out and do all of this?
Yeah, definitely. So I completed my physical transition, meaning like bottom surgery, what I considered the completion of my transition circle, in 2016. Right, like I recovered and was done with phalloplasty like literally like the month before he won. And so it was like an interesting moment in time, because I realized that if I had waited, he would have potentially taken my right to healthcare coverage of my bottom surgery, which was covered, even in New York. I had no idea what the hell Trump was going to do. So I remember I looked at my mom, we're watching the election results come in, and I said to her, I was like, wow, if I had waited even like a month, maybe I wouldn't have been able to have this insurance coverage and be able to like complete this thing that I really needed. So when I realized I kind of could take this transition journey and my completion of my physical transition and kind of use my resources to help other trans people as a filmmaker, then I was like, okay, well, now, having gone through my physical transition since 2011, I felt rooted enough to kind of take on Trump as a filmmaker and kind of use my story with what I was going through with my family and what I was going through politically to kind of like set the context for like my story in the series and set the context for like what was going on. So I think when I talk about the transition in the series, that's what it refers to as completing phalloplasty as a trans guy. And now embarking on a post-physical transition, like spiritual and emotional journey through the country, through Trans and Trumpland. And I think bringing it back to the present moment, it's devastating that we still do not have federal coverage of trans health care why? That is nuts. Like Europe, it's not like that everywhere, right? So I'm probably preaching to the choir on that.
No, but it's fine. It's important and
Yeah.
it needs to be said. So and I think at one point you even said that you were about 19 when you first realized what being trans was, or what transness was. And I think that that is like super relatable for myself and a lot of other people that are kind of like in our generation or our age group per se. Because it's just like, it's amazing how through social media and these like current documentaries and films like yours that are bringing this awareness that previously wasn't there. So I think that's, yeah, sorry, that's just me on my soapbox now. So
Yeah, it's different. I think Gen Z, like Ash in the first episode, Trans and Trumpland, I love how many resources and support there, like the support and growth that has occurred in Gen Z's like trans generation. I think that's great because I'm 33 and I'm like a millennial, and we didn't have YouTube or the internet. And so I didn't know what trans was until 19 in college. And I think it really shows how much progress we have made as trans people and how cool and resilient we are, because here we are making progress even with like these political figures like the president saying we don't exist. And I think that's a beautiful thing. And I'm like, trans youth are awesome because I think that it's going to be such a good time for them when they're like my age, you know?
oh, for sure.
And then like their kids will be even more woke. I mean, yeah, they probably won't have gender, honestly.
Yeah, it would be a step in the right direction. Speaking of Ash and your trip to North Carolina, I know you already said that it was kind of the spiritual journey for you, and I think that whole episode was very healing for a lot of other people that were viewing it, myself included. And I can't imagine what it was like to stand the scenes where you're standing in his room and you're just like talking about kind of like the parallels between your stories, and you shared that picture of you from when you were younger. And I'm pretty sure I saw that that was not something you originally intended to do. And I was wondering how that was for you.
Yeah. Yes. Good. Yeah. Good pickup. So Ashes, I think, was in a lot of ways one of the most emotional because it was so personal to me. Because Shane in the fourth episode is like a trans man, but not really. Two spirits different. So Ash and I were like the same gender identity, and I could kind of see my journey in his. And so before we went to North Carolina and filmed, I was like, why don't I just bring photos of myself, because maybe could be a good information exchange and on-camera moment with Ash if he had similar photos, because I was like, maybe kids still do that. So I brought this like whole stack of things for my house that I felt like were cool, including the photos. And then yeah, so I was in his bedroom and I was noticing things, and I was like, he's so smart, he's so cool, like we're having this great interview together, you know, like trans man to trans man. And then all of a sudden I was like, I said to like off camera to my crew, and I was like, you know, let's cut the scene and like whatever. I was like, in the other room is my photo. So I brought it out and I showed it to Ash, and he was like, wow, like doesn't it look like you? Like kind of, he was like inspired by it, and he was like, that's cool. And I'm like talking to him, and all of a sudden he's like, actually I have a similar photo of me like right now that kind of looks like the same framing, like that hasn't changed since you grew up. And I was like, that's cool. I was like, bring it out, you know, whatever. So then we're like talking about it and we're looking at it, and it was like interesting to kind of see the moment in time of what I looked like before, because I didn't have the opportunities that Ash does now and did when he came out. And I thought that was such a cool visual way to show the progress. Yeah. And have them side by side. That's really neat. And I think I'm like with Ash, I'm so proud of him, and I love that his classmates also support him. I think that's like so amazing. Good for him, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's super inspiring. It's like, it's cool. It's just another way that we all can keep like learning from everyone else going through this journey on where they're at. And I think at one point around that, you said something to the effect of being trans itself doesn't need to be a struggle, that society just makes it so difficult for us. And I think that that just like hits so hard.
Oh yeah, no, that's a good pickup. That was in the forest and
Yeah.
with Ash. Yeah, that's like I like just said it and then I was like, wait, that's a cool quote, and it's like something that I feel. So yeah, I agree. Like, why does it doesn't have to be hard. Historically too, like we were like revered at some point.
Yeah, true.
Now we're not.
And I know I kind of just jumped over to that. But going back to the photo really quickly, just a personal curiosity. So I'm about 4 months on T. Tomorrow will be my 18th shot. And so I've like started to be able to see a difference in myself. And looking back at pictures of myself from when I was younger, I think now I look more like myself as a child than I did like even 4 months ago. And I'm just wondering if you have experienced anything like that or.
Yeah, well, congrats. That's awesome. And the journey is great. Be prepared for a lot of hunger. And yes, it's almost like maybe what you're feeling, which I felt too, or like maybe Ash or whoever is I feel like you're returning to like yourself, because kids don't really get gender. They actually get LGBTQ stuff more. Like you tell them so and so is trans, right? They're like, oh, okay. Like they don't care. And I think probably what it is like you're returning to like knowing yourself and knowing like who you were before society put this gender stuff onto you, right? Because it's all socialized. And so I think, yeah, I agree. Like when I look at photos of how I looked when I was a kid, or how I acted and how I was like very confident, like, you know, masculine, like I'm pretty sure I told people like I'm a boy. I think it is like kind of seeing yourself before this first puberty kicked in, or before people in middle school and high school were like, you have to be this way. And I think that's kind of cool. And that's why I'm a big advocate for people starting to transition at whatever age. You're 10, cool. Like, believe you, you know?
For sure.
You're 13 like Ash when he came out? Yeah, I believe you. I knew at like 5, honestly. Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
And then, so after you were in North Carolina visiting Ash, you went to visit Rebecca in Texas, who is a transgender woman and also a Mexican immigrant. And that section was just like so powerful as well. I don't have enough good things to say about it. Like, for instance, when you went and had that entire conversation at the wall, just like about the arbitrariness of like, here's where all the funding is going. And here, it's just like mind blowingly, just like, wake up. You just like want to shake the whole country and just be like, wake up. Like, how was that for you? How did it feel being there with her?
Yeah, Rebecca was like such another interesting, like smart person, and like everyone in the series like to interview. And she had this great quote. And I think if I'm paraphrasing correctly, she said like, one of us said, it's such a shame that billions are being spent on this wall when you and I don't even have basic rights like healthcare. I think that was Rebecca. And I agree. And I think when trans people like us view that, we get it. We get what that refers to. And I think it's like you go to this wall and you see how pathetic it looks in person. I mean, it's not that tall. You can literally fit through it. You can climb over it. It's rusting. At one point, we showed like a spider cobweb in it, like intentionally. We made fun of it a lot. And you go and you're just like, so this wall symbolizes keeping Rebecca out, you know, like it's like I saw in person what that felt like, and I couldn't imagine what she felt like. And so what I think like I felt when I was at the wall is like definitely anger, being upset, because it's a misuse of resources. And I think if like Americans went and actually saw the border wall, they would be like, this is not that great. And B, like, this is what all of our tax dollars are going to, is this versus healthcare and other things. And so, yeah, that was a very emotional moment. Being there at the wall for the first time, and Rebecca and I talking there, you know. Yeah, it's such, if you ever go to Texas, to Brownsville, you'll see it. It's just, I mean, there's like open spots on it, like where you can drive a car, and I'm like, there's no border patrol either, right. Really, barely. Crazy.
That's like, I didn't even realize that there were the I forget exactly what they were called, but like the random immigration stop or checkpoints that you mentioned too. It's just like why is that even a thing we're spending money and time to do? It just, yeah.
And those popped up more during Trump. That specific one that we went through was 90 miles from the actual border, and it's like meant to deter people, and like you all have to go through it. And actually those are in Arizona too, and they became more popular during the Trump era. It's like, we're hours from the border wall. Like, why are these things here? And it was more something that he advocated for. Yeah.
Wild.
I know.
Yeah,
Like,
I think it's really cool how you portray the intersectionalities of these things, though, too.
yeah.
And another kind of more personal question, but related to Ash and Rebecca, um, you're very open about your relationship with your mom and how and your family and how that kind of petered out a little bit after you kind of came out and talked about being trans, and then how your journey of that coming back around and your mom coming back into your life. But I'm interested to know how it was for you being around Ash and Rebecca that had such prominent roles with their mom being in their life through this transition.
Oh yeah. Oh my God. So it's like it's wild how that all kind of came out in the editing. Was like, when we filmed, I didn't realize how much like motherhood and family would like connect. And then in editing, we were like, wait, actually, like Ivana, even though we didn't show her mother, she's a mother, and
Mm.
she had a grandmother. And then Shane was like, my grandmother. And we were like, wait a minute. Like in post, we were like, wait a minute. Everyone had like a mother in some way. Like all the dads were like MIA. And then, so yeah, so like seeing like specifically with Ashton and Rebecca and seeing how their mothers were like pretty present, and how cool it was that like even Rebecca's mom like pronoun shifted during the interview and was like there for her. I'm like, that's cool, right? And so I think for me, it like really showed me like how hard it was to like lose my mom and go through this journey of like rejection, then acceptance and whatnot. But it also was great because I realized like these people that are in the heartlands of America, they're being like kind of buoyed by their parents and mothers and support and family and church. I thought that was like so cool. And that's when I realized like, when we put this thing together, I was like, that's what I want to focus on, is like supportive people, supportive moms, not this like like trans support and joy. And I think what it speaks to is like cis and trans people don't need to like not get along, right? It was kind of like we realized there was like a powerful message there of like unity.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And I know you mentioned Ivana too, and that was the next stop on the documentary. And
Yeah.
you also covered a ton of topics in that one, from violence against trans women to religion, funerals, HIV and AIDS. Talked about, again, just like being shunned by family and the deep South, slavery, gun rights, like everything. It was awesome though, and I would love to hear more too about that. And I know she is, or it was mentioned that she was the first Black and trans woman to run a nonprofit in the state of Mississippi, the Love Me Unlimited for Life, which is incredible. So I'm sure that had to also be very impactful for you.
Oh yeah, I love it. I love just these discussions because like especially like you get all the issues, and it's like cool when you realize, oh shit, my filmmaker storylines are coming through. So anyways, Mississippi was like the scariest state to film in because it's like so deep south. The racism there is very palpable. And but the good thing is folks like Ivana that are there and that are both experiencing racism and transphobia is really cool. So it was like simultaneously the hardest state to film in, but also like the most life changing, and it changed my perception. So what we realized in Mississippi, we were like, wow, transphobia is linked to all of these things, right? And we can't unpack it from, it's like related to racism, it's related to classism, it's related to HIV/AIDS, it's related to gun violence. And hearing about Ivana experiencing so much adversity and losing her friend, a Black trans woman who was killed, that was really sad to hear about. But also hearing about how she used that moment to inspire and be strong for her community and open up the only trans-led nonprofit, I was like, where like else would this happen, right? And like this isn't known about in like the media. And I think for me, like, again, shows the way that trans people, we shape our communities, and we're not always just shaped by our political hostility. And she really is. She's like a key activist in the South. And yeah, it's just like that. If that doesn't change the world and like inspire people, then I don't know what will. But no, it is. It's bad with the amount that Black trans women lose their lives. It's rarely discussed as much as it should outside the community. Yeah.
It's about, I don't want to paraphrase and off quote this, but it's about 3 times more, I think, than any other, I don't want to
Yeah.
say minority group because I know minority is kind of a word that's definition isn't exactly the way it's intended, but anyways. So
Yeah.
last but certainly not least, you met with Shane in Idaho, who is a trans military veteran and not necessarily trans, but two-spirit individual, and has long been an advocate for the trans community, especially in the military. And when you were with him, the thing that struck out the most for me is how it seemed like you were incorporated into like the whole culture and the indigenous different traditions, and for a culture that accepts and kind of looks at gender fluid people with like this positive spiritual light. I How was that, and what was that experience like for you?
Yeah, yeah. I feel like in the fourth episode in Idaho, what began to shift in the way that we were interviewing and the way the storyline came together was like we kind of realized with Shane, with like all of his hats, military veteran, activist, two-spirit, spiritual man, dog owner, we realized like, okay, well, the core message could be we don't have to accept the political reality of how trans people are viewed and treated in this country, because before colonization, the original people who were here, Native Americans, did have a space for trans people, two-spirit people, a very sacred space. And I think in uncovering that and showing that in the fourth episode, it shows people who don't traditionally know about this narrative or this fact. It shows people a hope, and b like these are the political issues, colonization, white supremacy, that allow transphobia to happen. And I think for me, being very spiritual and realizing that Shane views being trans similar and his culture allows a space, it's like I think being trans in part is a spiritual thing, right? Or emotional thing. And I think seeing how Shane fights back and how he's ingrained into his culture, which supports him and uplifts him, I was like, this is a perfect ending to be hopeful, to be understanding that there's new political paradigms that we can shift into. And then kind of like after I left Shane and in those final moments of the series, I'm like, well, yeah, this is where we are as a nation. We're not sure where we're going, but kind of like I think what he showed me is that we can kind of like return in a way,
Mm-hmm.
culturally, to like this pre-colonization era, and maybe that'll work. I don't know, but it was kind of cool because I didn't know as much as I should have before meeting Shane.
I feel like
Yeah.
there's like kind of a global misunderstanding, not misunderstanding, but just like lack of knowledge related to spirit at all, or any of the cultures, because there's so many. um what do you think is the most unexpected thing you learned along this entire trip and process?
Yeah, I think for me, like I really did not like think that I was gonna get so much like trans joy and happiness and see so much like stories about like maybe people initially being rejected but then supported. I thought it was gonna be like, oh, woe is me and whatever. But then like especially like the motherhood thing, I was like, wow, that's kind of cool. Like the motherhood theme and like how everyone had their own journey with family, but like created support in their own ways. And also, I will say, like, I think spiritually, again, like, Ivana showed me that with Christianity and religion specifically, like, that doesn't need to exclude trans people. And I think how popular religion and Christianity is in the country, I thought that was really cool to show that. So I think unexpectedly, I kind of just learned that, like, we just belong everywhere, like, all of 50 states. And trans people aren't just like, we're not going to just be like victims. Like, we're not just going to be like, oh, woe is me. Like, we're fighting back. And I just think that like that was really cool. They all inspired me, like all four people, to like keep pushing forward.
For sure, that's
Yeah.
awesome. And so I guess the last question I have for you is, so what happens now? What's next, or what's on the horizon for you or TransWave Films?
Yeah. I think like everyone keeps asking me, like my family and friends and whoever, like people thought that the fourth episode, they're like, where's the rest, where's season two? I'm like, oh my god. So everyone keeps asking me like, is season two gonna happen? And I think probably I really want to do it just for a lot of reasons, and like with the anti-trans bills that are being passed and like practically everywhere now, I think there is a continuing conversation that needs to happen. So Trans and Trumpland season 2 is on my radar. And I have like some other documentary ideas that I have just about like gender and equality and stuff like that I want to do. But I keep thinking about season 2 because I think Biden is like changing things maybe at the federal level, but the backlash right now in these red states is really bad. And I don't want to like let that go unnoticed, you know? So
For sure.
yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
that's a very exciting thing to hear.
Yeah.
And then I feel like you and I come from the similar perspective of just wanting to having this drive to highlight other stories and others' perspectives and truths. And I really appreciate all of your work and you taking your time out to sit here and talk with me today. And this has been really great for me. And thank you. So
Yeah, same. Thank you for like interviewing me. I love learning about other people's stories. I think it's great work that you're doing. Seattle's great. And yeah, it's great to like, you know, kind of work together on this and get
yeah.
the word out and whatnot. So yeah, it's been a very enjoyable conversation. Your analysis of Transit Trumpland's like spot on. I'm like, okay, he gets it.
Slightly obsessed. Sorry.
He gets